Blog Talk Radio. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of 219 GreenConnect, where we explore topics about the environment and green living in Northwest Indiana. For past show archives, news, and upcoming events, you can check out our website at 219greenconnect.com or find us on Facebook and Twitter. Our ID on both Facebook and Twitter is 219 GreenConnect. You can also subscribe to our podcast via iTunes. I'm your host, Kathy Sipple, and with me today I have Permaculture Designer Randall Jamrok of Highland, Indiana. And Randy has recently written a book called Permaculture Solutions to Climate Change. And I'm very excited to have him as my guest today. So welcome, Randy.
Hello.
Hi there. So tell us a little bit about how you, well, let's just start. For anybody that doesn't know what permaculture is, I think it's probably a good idea to start with just a broad definition. Can you help our listeners understand a bit about what is permaculture?
Sure. Well, permaculture, I like to define it as a design science. And it's a design science that looks toward nature's principles. That is, the principles that nature works by, and that sets up its sustainable systems, for example, like a forest. And then we take those principles and apply them to human-made systems like gardens or any food production systems or shelter systems, or we can even apply it to our social systems. Also, my definition of permaculture for a farmer would be any way of farming the land that in which you're building the soil from year to year, as opposed to depleting soil from year to year. And also, I'd add that one of the co-founders of permaculture, permaculture was founded in Australia by two Australian men, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And so Bill Mollison says that for any permaculture system, there's four main things that have to happen. The first is wastes become resources. The second is yield is increased. The third is work is minimized. And then the fourth is the environment is restored. And one other thing about permaculture is that the word itself comes from a combination of permanent and agriculture, although some people say it also signifies permanent and culture. So the whole idea is that the way that humankind is living on the planet today is not sustainable. And if we want a permanent agriculture system or a permanent culture, a permanent place on the planet, we need to radically change the way we interact with the earth.
Great. Well, thank you for that definition. And I wonder if it would help people, too, just to, how do you know permaculture when you see it? Like, what are some key things that might stand out if you were looking at a permaculture? Is it called a permaculture garden, or what would it actually be called?
Yeah, some people say permaculture gardens, or I like to use the word system just to stress the systems thinking is a big part of it. And I think it depends. Like a lot of people, there will be a lot of people who say, they have a permaculture garden, and what they're talking about is they incorporate various techniques that permaculturists have kind of developed or that have taken from maybe ancient practices or indigenous wisdom. And so I think there's kind of, two ways of talking about it. One is permaculture. Some people just talk about like things that they do, like, for example, water catchment or vertical gardening or other such things, no-till growing. But also, I think if you're really, trying to get at what is a permaculture system, it has to do with the interconnection of all the elements. So
okay.
in that sense, it's not something that you always can just see right away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if you are a permaculture designer, and you received your certification at was it Midwest Permaculture? Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, great. So the things that you learned there, they probably included site evaluation. I mean, you've kind of got to get to know your land to find out how to bring it into balance. Is that accurate?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, observation is one of the key, processes of permaculture design. And so observation, on all levels, observing, the water flow across the land, observing the winds, what are the recurring winds that happen, temperature, solar aspect, how the sun, is reaching the land and what direction it's coming from.
Okay. So that really seems like a nice segue to go into the name of your book, Permaculture Solutions to Climate Change, because you're talking about working with things like temperature, things like water, and here as we talk today on January 24th, 2014, we're experiencing yet another round of just crazy cold weather here in Northwest Indiana, and what would a permaculture solution look like, to this kind of craziness or any other, area of the country that's kind of experiencing climate change? What are some things that permaculture brings?
Mm-hmm. Well, so regarding climate change, I think, it's such a huge, huge issue, and I think it's pretty obvious if you look into it that humanity is strongly influencing the climate of the planet, and that's related to our use of fossil fuels, especially petroleum, and all these fossil fuels are carbon basically, and in permaculture we kind of look at the carbon cycle, and you could easily see that through our use of transportation and industry, we've put a lot of that carbon into the atmosphere instead of being in the earth. So yeah, I think definitely when you change the Earth's system like that, that's looking at it from a design perspective. We've designed the climate to change basically by putting carbon from the soil into the atmosphere. And so when we do that, we're designing the Earth to warm, basically, on a global scale. And so yeah, we start to see these 100-year events every year, in some cases multiple times a year. So and a big part of it is these extremes in the climate. It's definitely a complex thing, and some scientists. It takes scientists really to explain a lot of it.
Yeah, sure, sure.
But even like anecdotally, looking at observing my own local region, like we've had quite a bit of extreme weather. For example, in the past 2 years, at my house, we've lost 2 trees just by these strong windstorms that have been coming up in the past, decade, really. And so, yeah, it's something I'm concerned about. And so I guess back to your question about, what are some permaculture solutions? I think permaculture brings to the plate the whole design aspect of it and systems thinking. And so, I kind of explained how we have designed the climate to warm. Well, if that's the case, we can also design to cool the climate again. But it's not something that individuals necessarily can do all by themselves. It depends on, whole communities and the whole global community changing things on a global scale.
Well, I guess that's why we're starting the conversation, is we're hoping to light a fire under, the individuals that will be the pioneers, and hopefully their neighbors will get interested in, gee, how is Kathy or how is Randy, growing that in their backyard, on, just a little bit of space. They're producing food, and they're producing, into the shoulder seasons, and they're doing pretty well, adapting to strange climate. I guess I'm just thinking of a couple things too, just thinking it through logically. If you are turning waste into resources, that means it stays on your property. So there's waste that did get put on a truck and get carted to the landfill. So that's, some carbon that didn't have to be, used for transportation. Avoiding tilling, again, most people till with rototillers that are gas-powered, or a lot of people do anyway. So if you're avoiding that, that's another way to reduce your carbon footprint with your garden. And then by, burying these organic materials, does it kind of help you produce like a carbon sink? Is that a correct term?
Yeah, I think so. And there's actually there's farmers who describe themselves as carbon farmers. And so they set up their whole farms basically in a way that captures as much carbon as possible. So you could do that through pasture land, through forest, and through the types of things that you grow. So that's a really interesting specific job that people are starting to do.
Well, I'd like to tell people where they can find out more about your new ebook, and I'll just give a website and tell them a little bit about how they can find the book and also support the project. You can find out more. Actually, we're hosting a page on 219 GreenConnect's website. You can find out more about the book at 219greenconnect.com/permaculture, and that's PERMACULTURE, just permaculture. And it's called Permaculture Solutions to Climate Change. And there's a link that you can click to either get a free copy, and hopefully you'll want to support the project as well. Randy's currently got a crowdfunding platform set up, and there are 21 days left, so it's going to go through mid-February. What he hopes to do with this is to raise enough money where he can print copies of this booklet, and it can be used for community education. So you can get a copy absolutely free. There's no catch there. But, certainly if you can contribute any amount, $5 or more, he's offered up a lot of, great rewards if you do that, where you can get printed copies of the book yourself, or, if you just simply want to contribute to the project and you don't want the reward, that's certainly fine too. But again, you can find this at 219greenconnect.com/permaculture. And when you click support the project, that will take you to his crowdfunding page on a site called We the Trees. So that's really pretty cool. Anything you want to say more about that, Randy? And I'd also like to have you talk a little bit about your experience in Cuba last year.
Okay. Sure, yeah. I'd like to add about the booklet. Well, I'm really happy that, we're almost 50% of the way funded, which is really great. And it's really nice that a lot of people have chosen the reward of receiving multiple booklets. You could choose 10 or 20, or I think there's even 25 booklet, reward. And the reason I like that is because it's nice to think that people will take the booklet and then, invite other people and to collaborate in trying to implement some of these solutions. And I think, in the booklet, I point out that from a permaculture perspective, the social element of the solutions, I divide the solutions into social, food-related, and shelter-related. And so the social aspect is a key component, because basically if we have dysfunctional communities, then the communities cannot act together to implement collective solutions. And from my perspective, I think our society is designed in a way to create, very individualist people, and to create kind of isolation, alienation, and that's for various reasons, related to the forms of transportation we use and lack of public transportation, but also related to the entertainment industry. And like if you look back into history, even 100 years ago, a lot of forms of entertainment were a lot more collective, a lot more things that developed a community. And today the way we do things, it tends to isolate people, and I think that's a big issue in also related somewhat to the global climate.
Mhm. Yeah, that does kind of make sense. I mean, I hate to say it, but even in my own household, it's like, often my husband might be in front of a screen somewhere and I'm in front of another screen. It's like even being in front of the same screen is a little bit of improvement. Certainly playing a game or doing some activity would be, better than either of those. But yeah, you can just see how fragmented, people get, even, when you're kind of trying to be green. So I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, definitely. And also my perspective of that, I mean, I thought a lot about this, and I also think it's important, to realize that, the system is designed that way. So I think it's important not to, necessarily moralize about individuals, like, oh, well, this person, they're just doing things wrong, they're just a bad person. What we really need to be doing is acknowledging that, people, we all do these things because of the overarching social systems that are in place. Mm-hmm. And the way we change those systems is through, talking about it and through collectively changing them.
Right. Oh, I totally agree. Can you name a community or communities where you think they are moving toward embracing these principles on a more, broad scale, a model that might be out there to emulate?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a lot of isolated examples. Yeah, there's the whole eco-village network, or some people say eco-village. Mm-hmm. So eco-villages are communities that are, trying to be really sustainable, but also trying to create authentic community. There's my permaculture teacher at Midwest Permaculture, Bill Wilson and Becky Wilson. They have a community that was an intentional community, I think, in the 60s, early 70s. It's called Stell, Illinois, and it has an interesting history. And Bill Wilson talks a lot about, tiny villages, or I think he calls it agraria, which is basically trying to combine the best parts of rural life and also more urban life into a small, sustainable community. And then another thing, I saw a really great, impressive presentation about Portland permaculture and the multiple community initiatives going on there in Portland, Oregon. So yeah, I think there's models that we could look toward that are already doing it. I think a lot of it's on the internet, on YouTube.
Right. So I haven't heard a lot of examples or any examples named thus far in Northwest Indiana or even Indiana. So, gosh, I'd sure like to change that.
Yes.
find some local people that wanted to get that started. And just to kind of put in a plug for you, I mean, you're a permaculture designer. You're also a consultant, correct? So if somebody really likes these ideas, you know, certainly we'd encourage them to download the book and look at that. But if they really wanted help with a project, you're available to do that kind of thing as well, correct?
Definitely.
Okay. Do you want to just give a little shout out of how people would contact you?
Sure. They could contact me through my email. It's rljamrok, JAMROK, @gmail.com. Also, I'm on Facebook, and those would be the best ways to contact me.
And again,
and it is one of my...
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say they could probably just contact you right through that 219greenconnect.com/permaculture page as well.
Sure.
Even beyond this, We the Trees crowdfunding, we intend to leave that page up so that the booklet can continue to be shared. So that's another way you can reach out to Randy.
Okay, great. And yeah, it is one of my goals to be involved in a project hopefully in Northwest Indiana that, does implement some of these solutions, especially related to food production. The permaculture answer to how do we best produce our food is to have basically a forest garden, which is mostly perennial food-bearing plants, trees and other plants. And so I have seen some of these, forest gardens, and we toured a bunch of urban permaculture sites in Cuba, and it's just amazing to be in one of these systems and to see the amount of yield that can be produced, and it's something that I'd love to implement in Northwest Indiana. There's also a video recently posted by permaculture, kind of a big name in permaculture, Jeff Lawton, and it's a permaculture suburban garden on just a regular house in Boston, or actually near Boston, in Massachusetts. And it's a really amazing, it's just like a 15-minute video, but it's amazing what people can do in a climate like ours. Very cool. And I just want to say, too, this is pretty impressive that just in, I think, 9 days of your campaign or having your ebook available, you posted on Facebook that people from South Africa, Crete, Puerto Rico, Nepal, Australia, India, Canada, the UK, France, Turkey, I'm not even going to go on, but there's a number of countries and states and all kinds of places that are interested in this. So we certainly hope to spread the news far and wide, but, I personally would feel really, really happy if our own little corner of the world, Northwest Indiana, got in on this too. It's kind of my goal with 219 GreenConnect is that we connect the green dots within our area. What do they say? Think globally, act locally. And with the power of social media, podcasting, you can spread your message, much further. But I sure would love to see us embrace these principles here as well. So say a little bit more about Cuba. You mentioned that the theme of that whole conference was what? The theme was Permaculture Solutions to Climate Change. Okay, so that was kind of the idea that got you started for the book? Okay. And yes, and also one of the themes related to that was specific issues to people living on islands, which is pretty interesting because people living on islands dealing with the rising oceans and other climate issues, they're extraordinarily vulnerable and the first really to be impacted. And so the first, there was a convergence part, and then, but first there was a conference part. And at the conference, it was more like lecture-type presentations. The convergence part was more like smaller group and more interactive presentations. But at the conference, it was mostly people living on islands, so Cuba, the UK, which is an island, Hawaii, Micronesian islands. There were just multiple presentations, and it was really fascinating to see these people really the first to be affected by global climate change, to be talking about their specific situations and the things they're doing and their concerns. It was kind of eye-opening because, when you're on an island, you don't have anywhere basically to run to.
Right.
And so the conference, throughout the whole conference, it was my goal to bring these solutions back to my community, because I think that is extraordinarily important. And so I was really kind of keeping my ear open for any time anyone mentioned, something related to a solution to climate change. Mm-hmm. And so I just basically, kept my notebook and noted down every solution I heard and compiled them into this booklet. And Cuba is a very fascinating place. They have a very interesting political history. So before the Soviet Union collapsed, they were getting the majority of their petroleum from the Soviet Union. And after it collapsed, basically overnight, they didn't have access to that, those resources. And those resources were really important for their industrial agriculture industry, and to produce food for themselves. And so they had to figure out a way to produce food to feed their population without using those pesticides, fertilizers, anything that relied on the petroleum. And the way they did it was they took aspects of permaculture and implemented that, and also they set up these organic gardens that they call organoponicos. And many of those organic gardens were, structured, very democratically structured. Some of them were, majority women workers running it. And so they call this period the special period, and it was really a period of hardship for a lot of people. But I think it's really inspiring to see that they did make it through that period, and they were able to keep their society going and keep their country protected.
Great. Well, I really appreciate that background. That certainly puts it into context and makes it all the more meaningful for them to have been the host of that conference. We've just got about a minute and a half left, so I'm sure I could talk to you all day about permaculture and ask more questions. But I want to make sure that we leave enough time to tell folks once again how they can get more information about Randy Jamrok's book called Permaculture Solutions to Climate Change. And you can find out how to download the book and also to support this project for the next 21 days. 21 days from now, January 2020, if you happen to be listening to this on iTunes. Okay, anyway, you can go to 219greenconnect.com/permaculture. And again, you can get a copy of the book. If you can donate anywhere from $5 on up, Randy's given a lot of different generous options for you to get multiple copies of the printed book and some other things. So I want to thank you again, Permaculture Designer and Consultant Randy Jamrok of Highland, Indiana, for joining us on 219 GreenConnect today. Again, I want to remind listeners that you can find us online at 219greenconnect.com. We're also on Facebook and Twitter, and the podcast and past archives available via iTunes. So thanks again, Randy, for joining us.
Thank you.
Great. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Okay, you too. Thanks so much. Bye.